Organisms that share common characteristics you would think would have common descent or a common ancestor, but there's going to be a certain body structure in which this is not going to be the case. So first, to start, convergent evolution is where you have distantly related species that resemble one another. Again, not common ancestry. Now, even though they don't share a common ancestor, they have similar problems in their environment. Therefore, their body has similar solutions. An example are analogous structures. So these are similar body structures. They function in similar environments, but again, they do not share common ancestry. Examples would be the shape of a shark being torpedo-shaped, which makes it really easy to glide through the water at a quick speed, and a penguin having that same torpedo shape, and a dolphin having that same torpedo shape. These organisms do not share common ancestry, but they are able to move through the water very quickly because of their shape, and they are known for having analogous structures. Another example would be sugar gliders versus flying squirrels. So if you look at the picture, glancing at these two, they look pretty much the same, but they do not share common ancestry. The sugar glider is a marsupial, which one of the characteristics of marsupials is upon fertilization in an embryo, it's going to develop within a pouch of the mother. A flying squirrel is a typical mammal in which the embryo is going to develop within a uterus before it's born, pretty much developed, which is different from the sugar glider. So these two organisms not having a common ancestor, but they have similar body plans and they have analogous body structures. Now the thought is that way back, they evolved independently from one another, but they were in similar environments. So because they were in a similar environment, they adapted similarly. But again, I think I said this 5 times, not common ancestry for analogous structures. So between homologous and analogous, it almost seems like their definitions are flip-flopped, but try to remember homologous, they externally look completely different, but internally, anatomically, they are the same internal for homologous. Analogous, not a common ancestor, and upon glance, you would think they have, and they do have, similar structures. The third piece of evidence for evolution is the fossil record. And to repeat, fossils are remains or traces of organisms from the past. These are found in sedimentary rock, again, the layering of the crust. And paleontology is the study of fossils. So again, kind of common sense, fossils show evolutionary change that occurs over time and the origin of major new groups of organisms. So it's really easy to see that there's a change over time when we're comparing an organism from either the immediate past or to really old past and comparing it with present day. And you can very easily compare one organism to another, not just within its own type of species. The fossil record easily shows what the oldest organisms are based on where it's located in that sedimentary rock to obviously what's present today or more recent. So, excuse me, in the sedimentary rock, it's prokaryotes that are the oldest fossils found. So again, simple-celled organisms. And then moving up the layers, eukaryotes, things like fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and then mammals. The fossil record also shows transitional forms and linking different forms on organisms to modern species. So I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier sections, how a whale has a pelvic bone. Again, a whale doesn't need a pelvis because it doesn't have legs. So making connections of these organisms, certain types of aquatic mammals. The class, I think they're called, the book calls them cetaceans, but they're just water mammals. So whales, dolphins, porpoises, these organisms have what anatomically looks like a pelvic bone or pelvic bone remains. So trying to link them to organisms that actually have a pelvis, that somewhat live in the water and live on land. So maybe something like a hippopotamus, trying to draw conclusions based on their structures that they actually have in seeing in history how many different organisms had that pelvic bone and trying to relate it to, again, whether it's the cetaceans that are present today or that are extinct. This is a diagram that can show evolutionary relationships. It's also known as a phylogenetic tree or evolutionary tree to be general. We will go more into this in chapter 20, but I wanted to show you just to be a little bit familiar with it now. You always start reading it on the left where the branch point is, and you move towards the right, and then the more branches there are is where there's divergence from characteristics, and then when they share, and the closer they are, when they share a split branch, again, similar like a family tree, I guess, but kind of on its side, they would be closer related. Again, we'll get into more detail on how to make these and how to read these in the next chapter. But again, it's an evolutionary tree. It can show parts of the fossil record, and again, we'll get into it next chapter. The fourth piece of evidence for evolution is biogeography. And this is the study of the geographic distribution of a species. And species in nearby geographic areas resemble each other. Now, one piece of support in the importance of biogeography is continental drift and Pangea. And this explains the similarities that are along the coast on the different continents. Again, kind of like putting the pieces of puzzles together. So continental drift, again, the different continents are on tectonic plates that move, and they are moving. So I don't know exactly the number, but it's between 2 and 3 centimeters, I believe, per year that North America moves. So over time, these centimeters, they accumulate, and over a large period of time would be significant distance between these plates where the continents are sitting on. So, and then Pangea would be when they're all put together and it's one land mass. So when you look at the continents in that fossil record, you will see often some, in the sedimentary layers, you'll see a lot of similar organisms in locations where those continents would be touching when it was Pangea. Now, there is an example called endemic species, and these are going to be types of species that are found at certain geographic locations, and they're not found anywhere else. So examples are like volcanic islands that are relatively new, that would not have been a part of Pangea. So on these type of islands, you will often see organisms that they don't exist anywhere else because that land is relatively new. The Galapagos Islands, being volcanic, they have unique iguanas. They also have those ginormous tortoises that are pretty unique. So because of its isolated nature, that island, it basically gives rise to new species because that environment is so unique and not a part of anywhere else. please look at this diagram for a few moments and look at that evolutionary tree. The only thing I don't like about this diagram is the tree is, the branch point is working upwards when usually those phylogenetic trees are on the side. So you might want to oddly kind of turn your head and look at it there, how they're branched off. But please study this diagram and have a general idea about how that tree branches based on species A to the evolved species B through E. The big question about evolution, is it a fact or a theory? And if it is a fact, it really is make-believe, because why isn't it just a fact? So a couple definitions to clarify fact versus theory. When something is a fact, it suggests that it's absolute and is not subject to change. Science does not like absolutes. A fact, in the definition, is that it's an observation that has been confirmed repeatedly and is accepted as true, even though truth isn't necessarily final. So the definition of a theory, evolution is supported by a large body of evidence and is used to explain new observations. So the example that I give is, think the theory of gravity. So we know gravity exists, but it's a theory. What makes it a theory? So what makes it a theory is the explanation of how gravity exists. Why does gravity exist? Even though that why isn't really something that can ever be answered, but the how. And there's many scientists to provide a lot, physicists who provide a lot of evidence to explain the how, but it's just something that exists. And certainly that explanation blows my mind because it's so complex. But gravity, we know, exists, but it's a theory. So the same thing goes for evolution. So the theory of evolution, change over time, it does exist, but as Darwin proposed, it's evolution by natural selection. The natural selection being that explanation of how it has occurred. And therefore, it's a theory that doesn't take away from the fact that it is something that's true, just the explanation how. So try to remember that theory is the how and a fact is an actual observation, repeated observation that is true.